It is a distinct pleasure to welcome Mr. Richard Swan, the author of the Empire of the Wolf trilogy and more recently Grave Empire. And I have to tell you, I just wrapped this up, Richard.
Okay.
And okay, you're going to crash my top 10 favorite trilogy. It was honorable mention this last time because I hadn't finished. But I said if this finishes the way I think it's going to be, this list is going to be null and void and crash. And I can promise you it's null and void and crash. So I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Excellent.
And welcome to the channel.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Well done for getting all three. And you've got Grave Empire there as well. Is that what version of that is it? Is that just a standard trade?
It is the paperback.
Unfortunately, they didn't go for a hardback release in the States.
I was disappointed.
I know, and it's happened with quite a few of my stablemates at Orbit and other publishers as well. There's been a real pullback on hardback releases at the moment.
I think in the States they think we love the flop. They think we love that. I would prefer a hardback.
My second favorite format is the mass market, the paperback, the really small one, the mini kind of. I prefer that to the trade.
You're a younger man than me. Yeah, my eyes. That part of my life is gone probably unless I really focus.
It's a young man's game.
It's like mass market paperback's a young man's game, man. Okay, we always start out this artist journey by kind of the same question. I kind of want to broach it to you and just kind of see how you deal with it. Always, there's a moment. Usually it's a crystalline moment. We remember it. We know when we start that artist journey. When was it that you knew that you wanted to be a storyteller, that you knew this is it? This is what I want to do?
Oh, it was. It's an excellent question. I can remember it very vividly.
We all can. Yeah.
I was about 12, I think, 12 or 13, and I was walking through the corridors of my school. And back then, your younger listeners will find this hilarious. But back then, there was a computer room that had computers in it, and that was where you went.
Remember.
And to go on the computer, I'm 36, so I'm on the kind of cusp of that. I had that in my youth, but by the time I was at university, it was smartphones. So I was kind of the whole, that shoulder.
You've seen it all.
Yeah, the full gamut of technological change. But yeah, it was the big chunky desktops, with the big monitors, and so it wasn't even flat screens. And there was 3 or 4 of them in a room. And I went in, and sorry, 3 or 4 is more like about 20 or 30. And I went in, and it was a lunchtime, and I said, I'm going to write a story, just like that. I'm going to write a story.
And it just hits you from nowhere. I'm going to do this.
I'm just like writing a story. And I did. And I wrote, it was like a sci-fi story. I was very heavily inspired by, I can remember it vividly. I was playing StarCraft at the time. I was playing Halo at the time. And I just watched Attack of the Clones and in the cinema, which had utterly blown my mind. I thought, what an amazing movie! I love Attack of the Clones, and so those 3 things just kind of condensed into, and I wrote this sci-fi story. And then from there I just carried on. I carried on for to the present, ongoing to the present.
So you never stopped from then to now. You always tinkering in the background, no matter what was happening.
Always,
in your life, never let go.
Always something on the burner. Always, yeah. I could probably string together end to end 20, books or so, easy money.
Wow.
I always had one going on. Yeah. I think there was maybe one time when in my kind of mid 20s and I'm just early 20s, I just entered kind of corporate work in London. And I took about years. What had happened was I had written a ton of Black Library fan fiction, a ton of it, on the old Black Library forums, which is the publishing arm of Games Workshop, if you're not familiar with it, Warhammer stuff. And I did that for years, and I'd got this huge following, and it was all going fantastic, great guns. And then they closed the forum, and I was adrift for probably about 18 months after that, where I just didn't know what to do with myself creatively.
So there was in that time you weren't writing, or you were just like, where will I put it? How to build an audience? What do I do?
I just stopped. I had my writing had become so inextricably tied. I mean, in many ways, it was a good thing that they closed the forum, because I'd probably still be doing it today.
Right. It pushed you.
Yeah.
Look where you ended up from that.
Back into absolutely, but back into kind of original fiction. But having said that, I credit those. It was about 4 or 5 years I was writing on those forums, and fan fiction is its own thing. But it's a fantastic way. I recommend it to anybody. it's a fantastic way to just churn out hundreds of thousands of words. I mean, like it's a real kind of boiler house to just churn through the words and just get the words down on the page and kind of practice the craft of writing.
Yes, you build up those 10,000 hours to get to where you.
Yeah. So that was great. But yeah, I was about 12. I was about 12 when I first kind of got bitten by that.
What I love here is the things that were inspire you at that time: Halo, StarCraft, Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, love it.
What about prose? Were there? I mean, I love the multimedia input, and I've always thought games it's like this interactive storytelling device that even now I don't think is being utilized the way it really should be or could be.
Right.
So early on, I hear the inspirations of StarCraft and Halo gaming and film, Attack of the Clones. Were there any prose that were sneaking in there that was moving you? Because I mean, that was the medium you jumped into when you went into that computer room on that lunchtime for the first time.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because whenever I think about my inspirations, especially in the sci-fi sphere, so much of it is tied up in gaming. And Tiberian Sun, as I was saying, was another one, where it's a very visual medium. So you're trying to sort of transpose those aesthetics, onto a page. And I suppose also it's with storytelling and writing, it's the only medium that's available to you really as a, someone of that age. As anybody can kind of write a story if you want to. There's no kind of barrier to entry. But having said that, I mean, what I mean is I can't just sort of like, I'm going to make a computer game. I'm going to start coding.
That's a whole different thing.
Yeah,
sure.
Which I probably would have done if I could have. But but there. I mean, I've been reading for longer than I've been writing, and I think at the time it was Peter Hamilton. His Night's Dawn trilogy was a really big one for me. What's the other one? Ian Banks' Culture series. They a very defining series for me in my teens.
Okay.
Yeah, it's huge. So I mean, one thing I've always enjoyed about Ian Banks, I say Ian, I've never met him. Ian Banks' series was that kind of that tension between liberal democracies, because a lot of it was allegorical of liberal Western democracies, and how they kind of, when they butt up against sort of an external threat, that doesn't kind of comply with the way that they approach things and their rule sets and their rules of engagement. How do you deal with with that? And so the sort of dirtiness and the murkiness of that. So that's a kind of a theme I've explored in a lot of my fiction, but Absolutely. Yeah, Ian Banks and Peter Hamilton, they were the big ones. And I guess, as I mentioned before, Black Library, I was reading a lot of Dan Abnett's books as well, going Ghosts and things like that.
I have not got into 40K yet, man, and I have people telling me I got to get into that.
It's a gateway drug. It's a mix.
It seems so daunting at this point. Like it's so much.
There's so much, and they're churning it out, at a rate of knots. But there's, with such an enormous oeuvre, you can kind of pick and choose where you want to come in and what interests you.
Yeah.
But usually, like, the first thing people will say is, "Oh, you must read Eisenhorn," which is the kind of inquisitorial trilogy by Dan Abnett. It's one of the best entry points.
I went to go find that, and I think it was I couldn't find. It's not easy to find anymore, I don't think. Yeah.
No, sure, yeah, but there's some excellent stuff in there. I'm doing some work for them at the moment, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
How cool is that to come all the way?
I know. I've been
like that's got to be kind of a moment, right?
Absolutely, it's a big bucket list item for me. And they used to have these open windows years ago, open submissions windows, where you could submit like a short story to them, unagented, everything, just straight up off the street. Obviously, I was rejected out of hand, but so it's nice, and that was when I was about 18 years old or something. So it's nice to sort of come full circle, as you say.
Yeah.
Be doing some official stuff, which is
this going to be like a full book, a trilogy, or I mean, can you say? I don't want to get you in trouble.
No, that's fine. I can say that I'm doing it, so I can discuss the fact of it, but I can't discuss what it is or what it's about.
Okay. Well, if nothing else, if I haven't got into it yet, yours will be the first.
Excellent. I'm really pleased. I'm really pleased with it. I really like it. I think it'll be a nice entry point.
Perfect. I was going to say, ease me in now. Ease me in.
I'll be gentle.
Okay.
A lot of people do die in it, though.
Okay. Well, I'm fine with that.
These are war stories.
I'm fine with that. So let me start taking you a little bit forward in your journey, Richard, if I can.
Absolutely.
So I love inspired by games and flicks because I see such a cinematic style in your prose work. So I love that tie there. And I also love the tie, which you're talking about, of Ian Banks and his work and the type of thematic things you do. So fill in some blanks here a little bit from when you went into that computer room at lunch when you were 13 or so. And hey, this is free space. I can type out anything. I don't have to know how to code. Sure. That was your first gateway drug for storytelling. So from there onward, you took a different path, if I understand right. You went into you went into the justice system. You went into like where?
Oh, yeah, right.
Like how did this stay in the background? How did this how did this happen? Like, were there mentors that you kept coming back to for art, or but like what? Fill in this blank for me.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, it just because I started so young, it just became a thing that I did. So for me, it wasn't like anything sort of special or impressive. Over time, to kind of be writing a novel and have written a novel and have written several novels and 10 novels, 15 novels, like it was just because I just almost did it unthinking. That was one of the benefits of starting at a young age. Like anything, like if you start learning the guitar at 12 or the piano or whatever, or drawing, you become you hit a kind of stride with it where you have a sort of unthinking, unconscious competence in it. And that was, the great benefit for me now is because I've been doing it for so long, I can kind of write a novel and it doesn't take a huge amount of. I'm not like agonizing over every sentence and every kind of on a craft level. It's just kind of coming out of me fairly straightforwardly. I don't have to think about it too much. And so for me, it was just a thing that I did, like a hobby. I just kind of did it and developed it, and in my kind of mid to late teens, I started wanting to become a sort of published author as a kind of goal in life. But that was never going to be my sort of career. I think you have to be exceptionally fortunate and talented to kind of hit the ground running at kind of 21.
It feels like you got to hit the lottery, right?
Yeah, right. So no, I was a lawyer by trade. I did a law degree, and then I was a litigator for sort of 10 years or so. Did commercial litigation in the city. And actually, we moved to London. We moved to Sydney, in Australia, about four or 5 years ago. And it was at that point I just sold the Empire of the Wolf trilogy to Orbit, and I said to Sophie, if we move, this is sort of like my compromise. So if we move, I want to write.
Yeah. And someone's waiting for 3 books. Did you find that different from early years when? Oh my gosh, it's a playground. I write because this is what I do. I write stories because it's what I do, and one after the other after. It's not a weird thing. Now someone's waiting for 3 books.
Right.
Was there a difference for that?
I think no, but only because because they had wanted me to set out, and this is a totally normal thing, by the way. They wanted me to set out like what the trilogy was going to be. So I had to sort of sit down and think, okay, what's the story actually going to be for the second 2 books? And so I kind of mapped it all out. And I'm a planner anyway. I love planning and plotting books. It's one of my favorite parts of the process. So I did all of that. And I knew, even when I was lawyering full time, I knew that because as I said, because I've had those many years of practice, writing a novel, not writing a novel, even in the background, even, in the evenings, weekends, whatever, was very, very achievable for me. I wasn't worried about physically having time to do it. So, now that I'm doing it full time, I write like 3 or 4 books a year. Like I'm absolutely just smashing them out. So I wasn't worried in that sense. I knew because I knew I could physically achieve I think a lot of writers, what will tend to happen, especially if you start writing as an adult, is you spend a long time writing that first book and rewriting it. Right. And you might get some readers and beta readers and blah, blah, blah. And so you could end up writing a book for sort of 2 or 3 years. And and the publisher's like, this is a wonderful book. Thanks, we'll take 3. And then suddenly you've got 1 year to turn around an entire new book. It's just, you've never done that before. And I think that's where a lot of people can struggle with the process, and they feel the pressure. I've had basically an infinite amount of time to write this first book with no one breathing down my neck. And now I'm in the inverse position. And once you have the pressure on the foot on the pedal of creativity, it can go one or 2 ways, can't it? And I think some people kind of wilt under that, and some people are able to get on with it. But for me, as I say, just because it was just like, okay, well, it's just another novel, and so there it is. And so
you had actually typed the end enough times to know I got it in my back pocket.
I know I can. This is very achievable for me. Yeah, exactly. So there was, and I think also because the publishing timelines are so long. So I think we sold that trilogy in, it was like August 2020, I think it was. But the first book didn't come out until February 2022. Wow. So by the time Justice was published, I think I'd already handed in Tyranny, done and dusted, before Justice even came out. And I was kind of breaking ground on Trial. So there wasn't even any kind of pressure from readers at that point because no one had read the first book yet.
Right.
So there was that as well. There wasn't even a kind of reader expectation to kind of manage. And
did you feel a bit of pressure from reader expectation when it started to come out and people?
You know what? It's an interesting one, isn't it? And I think you've always got to write for yourself first and foremost, and tell the story that you want to write, and everybody will tell you that, and it is the correct advice ultimately. I think it's a difficult thing. I do read some of my reviews. I read the 5-star reviews of my books.
Well, why shouldn't you?
Of course, it's a nice little, it's a nice little pick me up in the morning. It's like reading a newspaper. Okay, well, let's have the latest round of 5 stars. And so I don't get necessarily, unless someone is criticizing a book for whatever reason in the 5-star review, which does happen with great frequency, because not everybody likes everything. I'm shielding myself from the more strident criticisms, although I have a vague sense of what they are, generally speaking. But I think it's a very dangerous thing to start, playing to the gallery. I think you have to just be quite narrow, focused about.
You don't want to. You never want to feel like you have to respond to those through your work.
No, definitely not. No.
Yeah.
Unless the criticism is somehow, valid in terms of like, as in you have erred in a tangible way. Like, I can't think of an example, but there probably is one.
All that time, if I could take us back to our pathway a little bit here, all that time, hey, I mean, wow, I probably won't get to hit my lightning or win the lottery to where this will be a career, but I know I'm always going to do it. So I'm going to go into become a lawyer. You're still writing through all that time, like law school had to be intense, my friend. Like this doesn't sound like it was easy.
Well, what I would do is when I when I was studying, you got hours. You go home, and so the way law school works in the UK, you go in the morning for your professional, law school.
You go
the morning. This is a year-long course, right? And so in the morning, you go into college and you get taught. And then the afternoon, you've got to spend all afternoon doing your assignments or whatever. So I would write in the afternoon.
Were you just that good of a student?
That's incredible. I'm a very good lawyer. I didn't need to know. It's very straightforward. So yeah, I would kind of. It was the same when I was at school, though. To be fair, when I was kind of in sixth form, I don't know what that is in the US. So when you're sort of 16, 17, 18, you get like free periods because there's not physically enough lessons to fill the days anymore, and so you would get a few hours here and there to yourself, and I would just borrow a friend's laptop and I'd write during those times when I was supposed to be doing homework or whatever it is, and so I would always just find a way. It almost becomes a compulsion after a while. I mean, I describe it. If I don't,
absolutely,
like if I don't write for a day or two, I start to feel a bit twitchy.
Something's not right. You feel a little weird.
That's right. Yeah. It's just kind of. I go on holiday. A holiday from I've got a little baby. He's 1 year old now. He's my third child, and he still naps twice a day for a couple of hours at a time. So that's like if we're on a holiday, I take him back to the hotel room. That's 2 hours in the morning of writing time and 2 hours in the afternoon of writing time. Like there's no such thing as a holiday for me because it's what I want to be doing. So
I'm interested. Let me one more path question here before we move on, Richard. Obviously you had mentors that you still must think very highly of from a legal career. Do you have mentors in art, in writing, or because it was always you finding your voice, spending that time in and amongst the cracks of a legal career?
Yeah.
do you not have one?
I mean, I don't. I'm one of these. I see a lot of writers these days, and it's like, oh, blah blah. John Smith went to Clarion Writers Workshop, or he's a graduate of XYZ, or he's in this writing group, whatever. And I always think, like, I never had anything like that. It was very much just a kind of a very solitary. In fact, it's only since I became published that I'm on a few Discords with a bunch of other authors. It's the first time I've been part of a sort of authorial creative community, really.
Right.
The only other time I can think of is when I was writing on the old Black Library forums, because I used to have an official fan fiction forum. And that was a wonderful community, and everybody would critique. You'd post a chapter of a story, right, and then everybody would kind of critique it, or they would just say, like, "Oh, I love this," or some people would go like really granular, like spell checking, grammar, whatever, and some people would be like, "I don't think this works," in many ways, when I think about it, that was my writing workshop. Sort of
absolutely.
That was like the forum, so that was wonderful, actually, and I felt its closure very keenly when it went. But in terms of like specific, sorry, I cut across you there.
No. If you finish, go ahead.
In terms of specific, I mean, obviously, I've teachers at school who nurture the creative instinct and stuff. But in terms of courses or communities or whatever, no, it's always been fairly solitary for me.
Wow, I find that fascinating because so many artists, I find. It takes a certain amount of time to get that mentor's voice out of your head and find your own voice.
Right.
And about the time I hit into book 2, it's like, man, I think I could pick out a Richard Swan book from a lineup because you have such an authorial voice.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. It's just one of those things you just hone it over time, don't you? And I think, and that's the wonderful thing about fiction. And it's the one thing that, so-called AI can't emulate, or it can emulate it. That's all it can do. Is everybody's authorial voice is just something that's greater than the sum of their parts, and everybody has their own unique one.
Sure.
One of the wonderful things about fiction, and it's just it's the sum of your experiences and all of the kind of the push and pull factors that have existed in your life, channel onto a page. So, even though I have written fantasy, I've got a sci-fi novel coming out next year, I've got a Black Library novel coming out next year, I think if you were to read them as someone who isn't me, you'd be like, these are all written by the same person. I can see those turns of phrase, I can see those little flourishes, I can see those affectations. Oh, there's the guy who uses X in connections. It's that kind of, it's there, and I think that's definitely. It's definitely one of the wonderful things about fiction, and you find authors that have voices that you really enjoy. Like I've always enjoyed. I studied Ian Banks, for example, in a very kind of powerful voice, and I felt his loss very keenly as well when he died. But the very voicey fiction is always interesting. It's always worth gambling on and being a punchy with the voice as well.
Oh yeah, you got to swing for the fence, right?
Absolutely.
You got to, yeah. I love that solitary journey you took. It's different from so many others I've spoken to in the past, but I think it just shows there's so many different ways, as you were describing.
Yeah, right.
The beautiful individuality of creation is that we are also singular.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's right. I assumed everybody was kind of like me, in terms of...
Oh, gosh, no.
But no, not at all. No, people approached it very academically in some instances, and you can do like a degree in creative writing and stuff. Like, Ian McEwan, I think, was, also one of the best-selling authors in the world, a British guy, and he did like a creative writing degree at East Anglia University, and one of my friends actually did that course. So... there are ways of approaching it, almost quite a formal educational way, but I found my own way to it.
You know what? You and me, you and me, because I did it the same way. Just like, what? Grab your lunch pail and do it. Go out there and do it. Yeah. I
like it.
I love that. I knew when I was reading this, it's like, this is my guy.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I can tell.
Let me ask you, Rich. So loving Ian Banks, Peter F. Hamilton, going into some 40K here. I know you're bringing in some sci-fi genre into your work in the future, possibly, hopefully. I don't want to overspeak. what does working in these genres give you as far as freedom of expression? I mean, is it just because your cinematic influences early on, you couldn't imagine working anywhere else, or what makes these such a fertile playground for you? Sci-fi, fantasy, these kind of places.
Yeah, it's fantasy. I kind of fell into it totally by accident. Justice of Kings was the first fantasy novel I ever wrote, ever in my history of writing, my writing.
And you just didn't. How did you just said I want to do something different? Like, how did that start?
It started as a short story, actually. So I had a very good friend of mine, a guy called George, who's you know how some people kind of fall into the short story kind of circuit, and they love writing short stories, and they publish like 50 of them, and they're in like all the different Interzone and whatever. And he was one of these guys, and he write loads of short stories, and he would get them published occasionally. And I thought, so that sounds like a cool thing to sort of try. And I'd never really written short fiction before. It's not really a sort of what I'm looking for. It's not really a format that kind of suits my talents, if I can.
It's a completely different medium. Like
it is medium,
to be that concise and get in and get out and have a punch, like it's
absolutely
tough.
It requires its own set of skills,
and
a very specific set of skills. And I'm not sure I have those skills. Although I have written I'm getting better at short fiction, but I always struggled with it. Anyway, I thought, what maybe this is a gateway into publication. Ironically, it did turn out to be. But what happened was I wrote a short story. It's called The Witch of Rill, which ended up being the first chapter of Justice of Kings, almost entirely, like almost unchanged. And I sent it off to a few different places, and it was rejected by all of them. And I thought, you know what? I actually really like this short story. I think it's got legs. I think there's something to it. You get a feeling. I've written a ton of books, but this one was like, I got a feeling about this one.
Really?
Genuinely. I knew that there was something there. And so I wrote the story. It was really short. It was only about 100,000 words. And I was going to self-publish it because I had self-published a few bits and pieces before that. And from my same guy, George, I said, "Hey, have a read of this and see what you think." And he said, "Why don't you try and get it, professionally, properly published? And if it doesn't, self-publication is always an option."
Sure. But take a shot first. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yes. And so I did, and obviously that would have turned out to be like brilliant advice. So I owe him a lot. But so that's how it came about. But I always was a sci-fi writer. I always loved sci-fi. I always loved writing it. I don't know what it was about it that just kind of really tickled my imagination. I think, like most things, if you get into it at a young age, and what was interesting about my kind of falling into the sci-fi genre, interesting to me, was it was totally self. I found it, my dad wasn't a nerd by any measure, didn't go in for any of that sort of thing. So I'm not sure where my kind of interest in it came from, but come it did. And so, for me, I think, and for a lot of writers as well, when you're young, right? When you're 13, 14 and you're reading and you're playing games and you're watching movies, and everything is so new. Everything has a new concept, right? It's like, Attack of the Clones. People say it's a rubbish movie. I think it's one. I love the movie. And there's a huge element of nostalgia to that as well.
Sure.
But I love that movie, and for me, it's a very special movie because Phantom Menace as well, because it just did something to my brain. Like I watched it and I was like,
it's a switch that you can never undo, right?
Absolutely.
Like you sit in the dark and you're taken to that world, and never again can you not have had that journey.
And I think we as writers and creators spend our lives trying to
get back
to that feeling of like, wow, the last time I was truly excited about genre fiction, movies, whatever game. Like now, I'll boot up Halo, Master Chief Collection on my Xbox, and I'll play it, and I enjoy playing it. But I'm like, it's never the same as that first time. It never can be.
I know where every grunt is around every corner,
right,
every corridor.
I'm almost on autopilot.
Exactly.
But I love the existing in that space because it reminds me of. It's a shadow of the feeling of the first time I played it. I did an event with Jay Christoph in Sydney last year for Empire of the Damned, and someone said, "Would you write more Nevernight books? Book 4, whatever." And we're saying you don't want more Nevernight books. You think you want more Nevernight books, but you don't.
Yeah,
What you
you
want
don't.
is to read them for the first time again.
Yeah.
And you can't.
And what? Very wise of him.
I said that actually, but
oh, you said that. Very wise of you.
Very wise of me.
Yeah.
But that was, and it's true though. And then after I said it, I thought actually it's a really good point. And I don't think I'd put it so succinctly before. I was like, that's it. That's what we're doing. We're constantly trying to recreate that original virgin, love of genre. And of course you can't. And the longer you exist in the genre space, and the more
jaded you get.
Yeah, there's nothing can surprise you anymore.
The harder it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why sometimes you'll find a book and very occasionally I don't read that much. I used to read a lot more, but I'm a slow reader, and because I'm not commuting anymore, I don't have like an hour on the train every day anymore. My reading is really slowed down, and I don't read a huge amount of fiction either. I tend to read kind of history, non-fiction. But occasionally you'll find a book. For me this year it was I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, I think it was. So actually it was surprisingly an old book from the 90s. Didn't realize how old the book was. I found it in Waterstones. The way they positioned it, they made it seem like a new release, but it was like 25 years old. And it was about a woman who grows up in... It's a fascinating novel. She grows up
I'm going to find this. Okay.
It's really, really good. I've been raving about it. She grows up in... she's raised, basically, in a cage underground with 39 other women. And none of them can remember how they got there or why. They have these kind of vague kind of memories of a life before and some kind of apocalyptic cataclysm. But none of them know why. And she basically spends a huge portion of her life in this cage, and then they break free. And they break free basically into an alien world.
Yeah.
And I won't spoil the book, but I was blown away by how it inverted so many genre conventions. And it was a very introspective and inward-looking novel. It was fantastic, and I was like, "Wow!" And it was that feeling again of this. I've never read anything like this.
Yeah,
And it's totally. And I was thinking about it. I'm still thinking about it. I read it 3 or 4 months ago. And it's one of the best books I've ever read. But that was the first time I'd felt that way about a book, for a very long time.
It's
so
tough.
familiar. Yeah, it is to find that.
Yeah,
and so
tough.
Why it's so special when you do find it. That was a wonderful novel.
Just a quick break in the action to thank all of our correspondents, directors, and producers on Patreon. These people keep the lights on. They make decisions for us because we don't know what we're doing. We're not great at making the decisions around here. The decisions all the way from what I'm going to read next, what the book club of the month Patreon pick is going to be, but all the way up to video ideas and what we're going to do here on the channel coming up for you. If you're interested or you want to find out how you can be a part of this, right down there in the description box, click the Patreon link. It's got all the answers for you. And once again, thank you to all of these fine people that are helping us build the channel, our correspondents, directors, and producers. From what I'm hearing with Ian M. Banks and this most recent book that kind of blew your hair back, blew your doors off, it's that ability that we sometimes have in genre fiction when all the stars align and it gets it just right, that it's that mirror, right? We get to see a little bit of our human experience in the world that we're existing in through that lens, right? And it makes us reconsider.
I definitely think that's right. And I love the use of genre fiction for allegory. And I also think it's that wonderful mixture of that plus cool stuff.
Well, sure. Sometimes all you need is just cool stuff.
It's finding that happy balance. I think one of my favorite science fiction novels ever was called Fallen Dragon by Peter Hamilton. It's an almost perfect book in my mind. For what it does. It's a space opera.
I gotta read some Peter F. Hamilton, man.
Yeah, really good. 600 pages, and it's a self-contained space opera, and it does exactly what it sets out to do brilliantly. And it's a commentary on capitalism, what is in sci-fi, but it's also just got some really cool stuff in. And I think he just strikes that balance of spaceships blowing up, but also some quite incisive.
Here's something to think about.
some commentary, yeah. And I think
Yeah.
I think when I write my own fiction, I'm trying to kind of strike that balance of, sure, I've got stuff to say. We're all political animals, but it's got to be entertaining.
Yes.
You can't. That's the cardinal rule, right? It's a piece of entertainment. At the end of the day, that's what a book is, and it's got to entertain. So it's got to be cool.
But it's got to entertain. Yeah.
It's got to have. It's got to be both. It's got to. That
was one of the things I loved so much about. I'm sorry, I'm talking over you. One of the things I love so much about this trilogy is you do strike that balance for me. I think you truly strike that balance of the cool stuff, and yet, all right, I got to put that down and think for a second, because that's a really cool moment in this character's arc. And we're going to get into some of the themes and stuff later. But before we go there, I just want to come right out and say, the thing I love about this is the chocolate in my peanut butter or peanut butter in my chocolate moment. And we've got some really interesting, what people would consider horror elements in this epic fantasy trilogy.
Yeah, sure.
And did you want to go there from the beginning? Obviously, you start out with the Witch of Rill. Did you kind of want to mine some of that for atmosphere from the very start? Or did that just come at you as you went?
It kind of, what I wanted to do, I loved, and I started off in this way, and then I kind of leaned into it a bit more, but let me explain myself. So basically, when I've always loved, when I was writing my self-published sci-fi,
okay,
one of the things I loved was I opened the book with, it was these 2 UN intelligence agents, and they were watching an alien spaceship convoy going into the next galaxy, and nobody knew why, right? All they knew was they were going to fight a massive war in Andromeda. And then nothing else is said about it, right? It was just a thing that was happening. And I've always loved the idea of something happening behind the scenes that sounds really cool, but that you never really get to know about. So the best example I can think of that everybody knows is in A New Hope, when Obi-Wan mentions the Clone Wars, right? And everyone's like, what are they, right? Before they made, obviously, the Clone Wars. So for several decades, that was just a thing. That sounded awesome. That was never really explained. And when I got to Justice of Kings, I wanted the afterlife to be like a real place, and that could be visited, if you like. But it was only ever sort of hinted at. And so you can go there to sort of question a dead body or whatever, but you might get eaten by a demon if you do it. And so a huge part of the appeal of that kind of horror was, there's a difference between horror and terror, as they say, but it's what you don't see and what you don't know that makes it frightening.
Absolutely.
And obviously, we lose an element of that in Tyranny and Trials as we lean into it a bit more. But I think one of the things that was really cool about Justice was that hint of something more, like, oh wow, this is a real place with real risks and kind of real demonic creatures that can speak and hijack things. But you're only given a sort of tantalizing glimpse of it. And then I love the idea of having a kind of a sort of a pantheon. I've always loved, when I was growing up, I watched things like Sinbad and Jason and the Argonauts, or whatever, with the Ray Harryhausen kind of, sorry, excuse me, Harryhausen kind of, skeletons and cyclops and things. And then one of them, they have like the gods are kind of moving the chess pieces across a board.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
And I was like, and I love that idea of a sort of a pantheon of real gods kind of meddling in human affairs and creating my own pantheon, but in a kind of, it's quite a scary way, because it's so unknowable and so alien. And so I went from the kind of the more subtle to the more overt over the course of the trilogy. Now, some people like that, some people didn't. But I didn't set out necessarily to write a fantasy horror. But there was so much imagery that I loved from things like Wayne Barlow's Inferno art, which is, he's an artist, American artist, and he did these books, and it was like hell, or images of hell, Beelzebub, and all the rest of it. Brilliant, incredible images. And I wanted to work that into my inspiration of that, and my interpretation of that into the novel. So there was all these kind of elements, aesthetic elements I wanted to include. And it just kind of snowballed, as these things often do, into its, and took on a life of its own. And now I have this kind of, there's the kind of the real world, but then there's this entire kind of, no one's ever seen them, but I've got maps of like the afterlife and
cool.
the taxonomy of heaven, and all the different the Neiman Creed. I've got like a document on my computer that's like, here are all the different books. There's a book of histories, the prophecies of Gabriel.
That's awesome.
It's all there, and every time I write, I put it in the kind of the Bible. And so these things kind of like build and develop, and I wanted it to feel like it was a real thing. So that obviously the characters will say, oh, that's in the same way we might say David and Goliath. Everybody knows that story, even if you're not religious. Well, my characters, we're going to say the same thing, aren't they, about their own kind of pantheon? So they might say, Vancouver the Master, or Rami the progenitor, or whatever. These are kind of known figures that they allude to. The difference is they're real. They're real. Right. Well, depending on what you believe, but they're real in a tangible sense. They're real, and we encounter them. So it was just one of those things that kind of took on a life of its own, and I kind of lent into it, and I was enjoying writing it. So there it is. But,
so you leaned in.
Yeah,
I love your inspirations there, because as I was going through it, and it changed for me, is from book 1 to book 3.
Yeah, they do.
Because I had it kind of pitched to me, because I'm a big Lovecraft guy. I love Lovecraft.
Right.
And I pitched it, it's like, oh, it's Lovecraftian, it's cosmic horror. And it's like the deeper I got in, okay, I can see that in book 1. As we're getting into book 2 and then book 3, it's like, this is more based on the Gnostic Judeo-Christian beliefs of good versus evil, that we all can put our feet down on that sand and understand. It's not quite Lovecraftian. So I love to hear the inspirations of that from you.
Yeah. No, it was what was interesting was, as I was writing it as well, I was kind of like, I didn't want it to be, if you were good and moral, you went to heaven. I wanted heaven to be a real place, or certainly what the Sovans thought of as heaven. In reality, heaven is just a city in the afterlife that is basically governed by Nema, called the Golden City. But the soul doesn't travel there if you've been virtuous. It just exists in the afterlife to be kind of harvested or plucked or taken by whoever gets there first, basically.
Exactly. Yeah, that's that chaos is so it's terrifying.
Quite bleak. So and I think if you really key into it, and throughout the trilogy and Great Science trilogy as well, make reference to kind of scholars, for example, obviously fictional scholars, who kind of trying to understand and unpick this. So like there's the Rakusians, for example, who believe that the afterlife, because it's the infinite state of a person rather than the mortal life, that's the true life. That's and the mortal life is a kind of prelude to death and nothing further. So not only am I creating a fictional afterlife and a fictional taxonomy of creatures within it, I'm creating a fictional religion overlaying that, which is it's wrong, and then a fictional set of scholars who are also wrong in their own way, trying to kind of understand it. And I think the longer so my plan is to do a third trilogy set in a kind of mid-20th century, early mid-20th century. That's the plan. And so as in each trilogy, the understanding of what the afterlife is and how it intersects with the mortal plane becomes more crystallized and defined. So in the first trilogy, they are like, they basically, you have to use a corpse to descend to the afterlife and use these incantations.
Right. Yeah.
In the second trilogy, they realize you just need blood. Like blood is the medium, and there's this scientific leap into the understanding of thaumaturgy.
Okay.
And the third, I won't spoil it, but in the third trilogy, there's something else. So it's kind of evolving their understanding of how the afterlife works.
And also, you could also get into the understanding of the afterlife through different eras and epochs like that. Could also be impacted by social mores and how people see the spiritual and the afterlife.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
that's exactly right. And so and what's been fun as well, as the world opens up, as I make up more of the world, because none of it's real. What's been fun is to kind of think, okay, well, if the afterlife is real, it's not like we say, it's not like in the real world we can definitively say the Christian God is 100% accurate and everything else is nonsense. Because obviously the Hindus, think their own thing and the Muslims think their own thing.
Sure.
But in my world, the afterlife is real. So it's like, okay, so how do the different religions of the world, the spiritualists, how do they conflict and intersect?
Sure.
If you're all singing from the same hymn sheet, and so coming up with different ways of how, because they're not all Nemanists, right? So in the second trilogy, in Great Silence, there's this kind of like essentially a pseudo-Japanese kind of culture, And they interact with the afterlife very differently. So they're not Nemonism. Nemonism is actually banned there, and so they're more of like, they use it to kind of speak to their ancestors, so it's ancestor worship, and they can speak to them because they're still there in the afterlife. So it's been fun to kind of come up with different ways of different cultures, and the funny thing is it's all nonsense. Like none of, because the afterlife continues on, and it agnostic of all these things.
Well, don't sell yourself short. It is and it isn't, because we have this. Basically, what I love about this trilogy and this story so far, and I haven't started this one yet. Well, I'll hit you up at the end about it.
Oh, well, I've spoiled quite a lot of it. Sorry.
No, not just enough to make me really want to pick it up. So you're
Excellent.
Good.
Okay.
So, what we have this kind of battle of ideologies on two layers: the spiritual layer, the metaphysical, and then the very physical as well, because you have created this physical realm. Let's talk a little bit about this theme. And we've talked about the metaphysical. On the physical, you're really taking kind of a deep look at an empire overreaching and then getting out to its very edges and getting that pushback from different forms of identity politics, my belief in religion, my belief in class, my belief, as it pushes out and tries to overtake these things and make everyone conform in some ideology. They're getting some serious pushback as that goes further and further out, and then that starts to impact the very center in the capital. So, you say it's all just smoke and mirrors and fun and games. Not so much, because we're taking a serious look at that. Talk to me about that theme.
So, what's interesting is, when we start the Empire of the Wolf, the first paragraph is like, this is the end of, this is a decline of the empire.
Right.
We've hit the peak and we're on the downslope. And so one of my favorite kind of literary devices is dramatic irony. So the reader knows something that the characters don't. And I've loved employing that kind of throughout. But I think, if you're a student of history, I did a lot of reading and research, not research, but I sort of pulled my knowledge of history. It's a lot of like, the Roman Empire kind of, subsuming, religions, subsuming the kind of Greek religion, or, like saying to the Wends, for example, or the Celts, build your shrines to our gods now, and we're all square. The Achaemenid, Persians, it's just basically changing the window dressing on a right settlement, like, we'll change this shrine and we're all good. Just pay attention. And
we're all good. Yeah.
We're all square. And so it was very much like that kind of like almost a lazy empire building from the perspective of the Sovans, who just roll over a territory and say, okay, well, we're not going to kill anybody, but just pay some lip service to our people. We'll take your taxes and that's fine. And I think it wasn't until and then you've got these kind of like difficult hotspots. So much like the Roman Empire, coming into the sort of Germans, the Germanic tribes, and never being able to really push beyond those into kind of Northeast Europe. I wanted these kind of like places in the Sova where they were kind of running up again into the retaining wall of, really the extent of how far a kind of medieval empire could really go. I've always loved medieval logistics, and I think you neglect logistics at your peril as a writer. And if you think about the amount of I had this discussion with my son actually the other day, because it was really fun. We were talking about like if you wanted to invade another country, what would you do? And he was like, oh well, I would I'd build an army. And I said, okay, well, where are you going to get the people from? If we were medieval, you take all the women away first of all, you take away all the young and the old. Okay, so you've got X number of people. You're going they're going to want to farm. They're going to make food and farm and harvest the farm. So they're going to have to be at home, for the harvest. So you've got a sort of short window to campaign in. You've got to feed them all. You've got to provision them all. You've got to pay them. And he was like, well, I would just take money from. I would increase taxes. And I was like, well, and people are going to be happy with you now. You've made
they're not going to want to fight for exactly.
You can't do that forever, And it's like, and then I was like, well, you're going to borrow some money. You got to pay the money back, with interest, and there's all these different considerations, and where you're going to feed them. You could have given horses, you could have given mules. I was reading a book about the Boer War, which you might not be familiar with, but it's a war between the British Empire and the South African republics in 1899 to 1900. Fascinating conflict, just looking at the cost of it, the monthly cost, it was something like £1.5 million, which, in those days was an astronomical sum of money. And it was like, and they required something like 600 oxen a month and 350 horses, or, thousands of animals to move everything. Yeah. And the food to provision them all. And anyway, so long story short, I've always loved these kind of imperial logistics. And so as soon as you get to the kind of the outermost reaches of an empire, you really are a very tenuous toehold. You can't throw people at it forever. And so I love this idea of having a frontier that was being raided by pagans and Koreshians and wolfmen. And in the east, they've kind of hit a sort of the Kovoskans. I can't remember what they're called now, but I think it's Kovoskans, the Kova Confederation. In the east, they can't expand because they've met a power of equal power to them, so they're just kind of stuck. Right, these kind of garrisoned castles. And so, and those areas are ripe for kind of narrative, interplay between different cultures. That's when we really start to meet people who are totally external. Because in the Soviet Empire, in the Empire of the Wolf trilogy, the people are more or less the same, right? Mm-hmm. You've got the Tolls and you've got the Howners and the whoever, but they're all kind of, parts of
recognizable, sure.
Yeah. But once you're kind of abutting into totally alien cultures, the Wolfman, for example, it's rich kind of to explore the kind of conflict there. So I've always loved the as every fantasy author does, love the conflict of foreign nations. Yeah, it's a theme I think I'll explore forever. But yeah,
you do it so well here, and I also want to ask you about, in book 1, Conrad von Volt on the outskirts, on the frontier, living. I love this character arc so much. Here's a man who, to his core, believes the great equalizer is our ability to all subscribe to the same ideals of law.
That's right.
Right? And then your decision to tell his story through the POV or through the eyes of Helena Sedinka. Tell me about that decision, because I think for me, it brings in something that would have been missing if it would have been first POV or something else, because we get to look into what defines a great man, what defines a man that's called by destiny to rise up, not by himself, but by those people around him, which is more defining than how he sees himself.
Yeah. I think it's, I think as a narrative tool, I read it in Robert Harris's Cicero trilogy, which I loved. It's about Cicero, obviously. But it's from the perspective of his slave, Tiro. And I was like, what a wonderful device. Because ultimately, I think, von Volt has a lot of parallels with Cicero. And he was a lawyer, and then he became a statesman. And I love the idea of writing a story about a kind of, so-called great man of history, but I thought it would be tedious in some ways for von Volt to tell the story, because
right. If it was that classic framing device, like
yeah, he could justify any kind of thought. I think to get inside his head would have been profoundly uninteresting, and I think it's much more interesting to see not only him through the lens of somebody else, but somebody else who's so unsure of their own place in the world. And I think, and to sort of depict von Volt at his best and worst, and to sort of dehumanize him. So, for example, I think one of my favorite little kind of quirks about von Volt is he's a hypochondriac, right? So, he's sort of fastidious and fussy.
Yes.
And he gets worried about illnesses. So they spend the first chapter, I think, of book 2 at a doctor's while he gets kind of various potions and things. Now, that's a detail that he wouldn't have said about himself, if he was writing the story. And so once you have someone else telling the story, you're able to round out a character in a much more interesting way, I think. And it just provided that kind of extra layer of rich narrative seam to mine. Not so much von Volt's, but von Volt's effect on other people as well.
Right.
I think. And it just made it a more interesting book, I think, as a result.
I just love it so much, because it's like, as you said, von Volt would be able to rationalize whatever. Well, I was called to do this. I had to do that. But
Right.
when you're looking at it from, I mean, let's face it, he pulled Helena Sedinka and saved her. And she's very much an acolyte to him and the legal ideals of that he's teaching her. So for her to start to see the cracks start to form in him as we get into the themes of how much of your moral sinner will you let go of to achieve what you have to do? Like how much of yours, how long can you look in that abyss at that creature and say, I can beat him, but I got to become him? I mean, it's all those cracks that she can recognize. And we see the reaction of that he would have rationalized away, right?
Yeah. I think, and that's exactly right. And I think, when you read Empire of the Wolf and you think, obviously, when the stakes become so high, you can just do just about anything to preserve the realm, right? There's very few things that are impermissible ethically, and I think what's interesting about having Helena tell that. So because let's take if Sir Adamir was telling the story, they'd be like, yeah, of course we fucking did that.
We got to do what we got to do.
Sure, right. Yeah. I think having Helena, who is a very strong moral center, and maybe too far, in some ways, struggle with that, and I think I just wish we could have done it all and been good guys the whole time. I understand why we didn't, but I wish we could have done.
But the beauty of it is her moral sinner is installed by transitive property of teacher by von Volt.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So to see him start to unravel from the tragedy of book one that he has to overcome, he starts and as he starts to unravel and she's watching it, it's heart-wrenching and poignant and lovely and beautiful.
Yeah, thanks.
And my hats off for you to making those themes apparent and important, and the POV from Helena to highlight them.
Yeah, no, it came together nicely in the end. I think it's one of those. It's a character, and people have their own thoughts about it, and obviously not everybody thought I did a good job. But I think it's one of those. I think it's one of those trilogies where I don't think I could have written it again. Like it was a kind of I've managed to kind of capture quite interesting character dynamics as they kind of come together and converge and diverge and come together again. And I think it happens in quite a nice, organic, and quite a messy way as well. Like it was important to me, I think, especially in book two, when they kind of, a lot of people didn't like the quote unquote romance, but I think, here,
and I had heard that. I had been warned about that. Oh, you might not like, and for me, it's like, I'm sorry, this is completely reasonable and realistic. There's no way these people are going to be the stakes this high, spend this much time together, and be this important to each other, and not explore what it is our species has to do to go to live, to go forward. You know what I'm saying?
I think it was like, I think you've put it very nicely there, and I think I agree with that summation entirely. And I think the point was not, I wasn't trying to make it like a thing that people rooted. Some people did root for it, but you're not supposed to be like, oh yay, Helena and von Volt. It's more like, as you've said, these two people in this kind of pressure cooker. Inevitably, there's going to be some kind of exploration of that dynamic. Now, I presented it as a fairly unhealthy dynamic. To be fair, I wasn't trying to make it seem like it was a good thing, but I thought it was important to kind of cover that ground. But I think, and fair enough, like people approach books in different ways, don't they? And I think a lot of people liked the kind of father-daughter dynamic of book one. But I certainly thought I had sort of planted the seeds of that awkwardness between them in book one. So anyway, I'm not here to kind of just defend it. People
I will not ask you to. But I'm just saying, for me, why it worked for me personally.
And I think it was. I think the point I was trying to make was that it was an exploration of those two people, and it was important that it was a kind of full 360-degree exploration of their because that's the emotional core of the story, right? Their dynamic. And I think it's
an amazing. She gets to watch him as he rises and ascends to be this huge person in the history of this world.
Yeah, right.
And while he's ascending and rising, she's seeing his moral core just completely decline and unravel.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I think, and what's interesting, I think, is one of the kind of details I liked about what I'd come up with for Von Volt was because he had been pressed. There's a sort of another theme really, which is what happens to you in your younger years, really. Because Von Volt was pressed into the legions as a 15-year-old, so he did horrible things,
and the cost that
absolutely. Yes. And I think so for him, he was like, well, I've done all of these things now in the name of sort of Soviet conquest, so I'm going to really kind of subscribe to those ideals, because if I don't, mentally, what was it all for?
What can we go back to?
It was all for nothing. I killed all those people basically for no reason at all. And so, Von Volt is kind of very ferociously pro-Soviet, and as a result of that. But it's because at his kernel is actually very fragile in terms of this kind of imperial.
But aren't ideologues always are?
Right. Well, exactly.
When you hitch your wagon to that one idea,
they're terrified of it all sort of crumbling. And I think there's a few times I think Sir Radames says it as well to Elena in book 2. I think one point she says, what was the point of it all? Referring to the kind of imperial expansion. If this was we built it on this foundation and it's rotten to the core, what was the point of any of it? Yeah. And so it's kind of theme that runs through the novel, I think, and there's another one I kind of liked.
Let me ask you quickly. You said early on you're a planner. You love to plan. You plot it all out, and then you said something about this trilogy, how it came together organically with these characters, and it was messy when it came together. So, hey, square that circle for me, there, sure. Richard. Like you got your cake and eating it too a little bit there.
No, I did plan it completely out. I think. But, I don't plan it down to the nth degree. So, obviously with
So you leave that space for happy accident, for surprise. You could be surprised. You don't plan to that degrry.
No. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So I know this chapter, this needs to happen, and this chapter, this needs to happen. And this book is going to have 30 chapters, and this is the story. But, there'll be a conversation that takes place that I'll just completely wing in the moment. And that will take me in different sort of directions. So, and so I think that has lended itself to the kind of messy, organic nature of their character development. But so I didn't plan every kind of little thread. That would be, oh God, that'd be
just wanted to clarify.
Task. Yeah, no.
This is that one moment. Now, look, I have to do this. Everyone, I hope everyone has been enjoying this. And if you have not picked these books up, I cannot recommend them highly enough. I think you can tell by the way I've been talking about it with Mr. Swan here, how much I enjoyed them. Please do. But if you have not yet, we're going to get into a little bit of spoiler action because I just have to do it. I just have to bring up something. So if you have not, please click off because I'm going to the end of book 3. So I'll give you to the count of 1, 2, 3. If you're still here, it's on you. Okay. My medium of choice when I went on my artistic journey, Mr. Swan, was theater. So I absolutely love and adore 12 Angry Men, Inherit the Wind, For a Few Good Men. You can't tell me the end of book 3 when Von Volt gets to stand up and have that moment where he lays out the dangers of ideology and extremism and who we are as a people. And he has that jurisprudence moment of defining us who we are and who we should be moving forward. You can't tell me you weren't salivating all the way through books 1, 2, and 3 to get there. That I was reading that going, this is what he's wanted to write this whole trilogy, and I am eating it with a spoon. I love it.
Good man. I loved it. I thank you. That's really you know what? In some ways, I wish I'd made it longer, but in other ways, I feel
it could have been longer.
You can have too much of a good thing, can't you? I think, in some ways, I wanted to do the whole of book 3. Maybe hindsight's 2020, but you could have had the trial as a framing device.
Yes, and cut in between.
Yeah, but then you would know basically from chapter 1 that they got the bag.
You're right.
So it wouldn't have worked in narrative tension wise, but I loved writing that scene, and obviously there was some heavy inspiration from the big legal dramas you've already mentioned. The kind of did you order the code red? Yeah, you're goddamn right. I ordered the code red. Yeah.
You can't handle the truth.
Yeah, love it. There's big moments. So, and obviously, I was trained lawyer, so it's very much part of the day job seeping into the novel there. But yeah, no, I decided quite early on that I was going to have a trial.
Yes.
And all roads.
I mean, there's no other way it could end.
No, I don't think so.
The beauty of it is that character arc we've been talking about that was cataloged by Helena that von Volt has traveled.
Mm.
This moment in the capital, standing before the empire that he's done everything to save and his people, and to lay this argument out in this way, it's almost like he gets to recapture a bit of what he's lost. He gets to have a redemptive moment, and it's just, I would love to play it. I mean, that's the biggest compliment I can give to you. I would love to play that scene.
No, it would be incredible, wouldn't it? And I think it was, when he says in the fighting in the Temple of Savar, I think, and he says, come to define myself by, what you think of me or something. And I think Helena says, von Volt says to Helena, I think it's the longest time you defined yourself by what I thought of you. Perhaps I've come to define myself by what you think of me. And I think it was that kind of, basically the idea was in my head that Helena had been kind of placed there in that moment at that time to kind of to walk him back from the edge, rather than just cutting Clave's head off there and then.
Oh,
make an example of him,
You have to do it. You have to do it.
Yeah.
Don't do this. Don't go this far. Don't go this far.
There's still time to kind of come back. And I think, and only Helena could have done that.
No, there's no one else. No one else is. It's for those same reasons where they had to explore that relationship that we were talking about earlier.
Exactly, yeah.
There's no one that had traveled together, that understood each other, that had been through it with each other. It was only her. She's the only one.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So it was a nice, as you say, it was a nice kind of, he just came back from the brink. He wasn't lost to the dark side, if you will. He didn't become Darth Vader. They pulled him back on Mustafar. They pulled him back.
He went right up to the precipice. But he it's such a great arc, and it's so well done. And I'm telling you, it's crashing my list. I'm going to have to redo my list. I do it once a year, and now that I've finished this, it's absolutely going to do. So I haven't started this yet, but you can tell immediately I ordered it in. After finishing this, I immediately ordered it in. What do I have to look forward to? Is this a sequel? Is this a prequel? Is this? I have the only thing I know is got a 1 on it, so I'm guessing it's another trilogy.
Okay, it's another trilogy, and it's set 200 years after the end of Trials of Empire. So it's
200 years after.
We're in a kind of flintlock, era, and I wrote it to be. You can read it as totally separately. It's a completely fresh jumping off point. So it is a sequel. It is set in the same world. And there are kind of hints at events and Easter eggs in that first book. But it was important to me that, you could read it agnostic of the Empire of the War.
Okay.
And then there are more references, books 2 and 3 as well, as we work out. So at the end of book, we're back into non-spoiler territory probably now, but I don't know how you want to deal with that. But at the end of book 3, obviously, certain things happen, certain practices are outlawed and banned.
Yeah.
And we see the long-term ramifications of those decisions, and how they and the unintended consequences of those centuries later. So it's been fun to kind of develop the world and fragment and see how the map has changed and fragmented and expanded as well. So
do we get a peek of how history sees von Volt as we move forward?
A little.
And what he's done.
I didn't want to. I'm very anti kind of. Remember this? Remember that cool thing? Remember that?
Yeah.
Modern, so I didn't. There are hints here and there, but I did want to steer clear of that. Yeah, and when I got to the end of Trials of Empire, I was like, that story feels quite sacrosanct to me. I'm gonna leave that there. I do have a prequel coming out, a novella in October. That's just von Volt. With Grimdark magazine, they bought the rights.
Oh, great! Okay, I will be looking for that.
So that's called The Scour, and that is von Volt and Bressinger, and that's just a kind of 35,000 words. Here's a crime. Here's them solving it. That good stuff. No Helena. Just those two kind of dynamic duo. So it's kind of like a von Volt case files sort of thing. But in terms of the von Volt and Helena arc, I was like, that's done.
This is where it is. Yeah.
Okay. That's it. I could only dilute that by adding to it now.
Yeah.
And I think it's know when to leave the casino, So I was like,
and then other than that, we've got some 40K. We've got anything else that
yeah,
you
I've got to say, I've got a 40K novel which I can't talk about except for the fact of it, but I can talk about a new sci-fi series coming out. It's, not IP fiction; it's totally original. Insofar as anything is totally original these days, it's a dystopian sci-fi series.
Ooh, okay.
First book is called The Infinite State, and it's basically about it's a multi-POV affair, but basically people living in this horrible fascist fertility cult, space Nazi kind of empire, and this woman, it's a very kind of 20th century totalitarianism, 1984 kind of vibes. And this woman, her husband, is a sort of senior party member, and he dies in mysterious circumstances, and she inherits billions and billions and billions. Oh. And in this galaxy, you can basically buy settlement rights to a planet. And so she buys these rights, and it's about her kind of setting up democracy from the ground up to nation building.
And the pitfalls, I'm sure, that followed trying to do that. And yeah.
And how the empire kind of tries to sabotage that.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about that book. It's going to be really, really cool. That comes out next July.
You're going, you talk about full story, you're going all the way back to those Ian Bank roots.
Coming back to sci-fi, absolutely. Yeah, that's it.
Oh, and good I think for you, man.
But I'm glad, it's one of those things that the book could only have been written in its current form now. I'm glad I didn't write this book in my early 20s, and this was the first novel. Sometimes you've got to let an idea kind of percolate and breathe and wait for the skill to catch up to the desire. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is, I got a good feeling about it. I think it's got the secret sauce. I'm excited about in the same way I was excited about Justice of the Kings. I think Infinite State's got some big potential. Yeah,
I will be there for it.
Good man.
Richard Swan, thank you so much for taking the time. I know it's evening where you're at. I know you've got a family, and to give up some time and spend it with me, I can't tell you, it really means the world.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. I've noticed it's sort of slowly been darkening around me as the time has gone on. we've transitioned from late evening to nighttime. But, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed talking at you for a very long time.
You made my day, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
And thank you all. I can't tell you enough. If you haven't grabbed this yet, this is one you absolutely want to get on the ground floor. And there's no way you won't keep going if you do. Take my word for it. Thanks so much. Thank you, Richard Swan. Thanks all of you.
Cheers.